Hello students, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Hargrove's math class. Today we're going to talk about the percent of change. Before you watch this lesson, just make sure that you've already watched my lesson or have a thorough understanding of the percent bar. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the lesson. The learning target is students will learn how to use proportions to solve problems that involve percent of change. The success criteria. Students will know that they are on track to reaching the learning target when they can read the word problem to determine if the percent is increasing or decreasing, set up the percent bar with X and the other numbers in the correct place, use cross products to create an equation, solve the equation to determine the value of X. Now, percent of change is different than the standard percent bar. Here you're dealing with a percent that is either increasing or decreasing. So it's very important that we're able to identify certain components in order to utilize the percent bar that we're going to apply here appropriately. So the key thing here is remember that you do need to identify the amount of the change. With percent of change problems, you're dealing with issues where the percent has changed. Okay, it could be something along the lines of on one test, Marty scored 80%. On another test, Marty scored 90%. By what percent did Marty score change from one test to the other? So you need to be able to identify the amount of the change as well as the original quantity or the original amount. So when we move to this next slide, we're going to talk more in detail about that. This is the basic format for the percent of change. So this is what your proportion will look like. 100% is always going to be there, as it was with the standard percent bar, but here you're dealing with a percent of change, and it's an amount that we don't know that we need to figure out. However, in the problem, they do give you information to figure out the original amount. When you look at the original, this is going to be the first amount. You have to read the word problem to determine which amount is the original. So it's going to be the amount that comes first. And also the amount of change needs to be calculated. You find the amount of change by subtracting the smaller number from the larger number. So if you look at the original amount and the new amount, you need to find the difference between the two numbers, but you should never get a negative number. Again, you should never get a negative number here. That's a common mistake students make sometimes. They think that they always have to subtract the original from the new, or they always have to subtract the new from the original, and sometimes you may get a negative number. Just remember, you always subtract the smaller number from the larger number to get the amount of the change. And once you know the amount of the change in the original, you can do some math that you should be familiar with by now to find X, which is going to represent the percent of the change. So just keep that in mind. To find the percent of the change, figure out the amount of the change, as well as be able to identify the original. Once you're able to do that, you're going to be in good shape. So let's go ahead and get into an example. It says the temperature increased from 60 degrees to 75 degrees. Find the percent of the increase. Now, as I approach this problem, I'm going to make note of the percent bar that I'm going to use when dealing with percent of change. And then all I'm going to do is just plug in the numbers where they go. So if we look at this problem, and what I'm going to do is I'll just go ahead and I'll draw just a bar next to it, and I'll just mimic what this says. So 100% will be here, X will be here. What is the original amount? Well, it says the temperature increased from 60 degrees to 75 degrees. So which amount came first? Well, the 60 clearly came first, so that's going to be my original amount. And then I need to figure out the amount of the change. Now remember, when you're dealing with the amount of the change, you're going to subtract the smaller number from the larger number. So over here, I'm going to do 75 minus 60, and that's going to give me 15. So that's the amount of change. This is the most challenging part of figuring out percent of change, is just setting up the bar. Once you have the bar set up, you now have a proportion. And now that I have that proportion, I can solve it. My proportion is 100 over x is equal to 60 over 15. And now I'm just gonna follow my rules for cross products, and I'm set to go. 60 times x is 60x, and then I'm gonna do 100 times 15. This is 60x equals 1500. And at this point, I just need to divide both sides by 60. And when I do, 1500 divided by 60 gives me a 25%, and this is an increase. That is the percent change. That is all we're doing. When you can figure out the original amount and you can figure out the amount of the change, you're in good shape. Everything else is what we've been practicing. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. Let's look at example number 2. Mr. Leary's homeroom recorded the total number of books read per month. In November, they read 65 books, and in December, they read 52 books. What was the percent decrease from November to December? Well, I'm gonna utilize my same bar, and what I'm going to do is, again, draw one next to it. 100% is gonna stay here. X is gonna be here because I don't know the amount of the percent of change. Now, what's the original amount? Well, November comes before December, so the original amount is gonna be 65. 65 came first. Now what I need to do is figure out the difference between 65 and 52, which we're just gonna subtract. Always subtract the smaller from the larger. So 65 minus 52, that's gonna give me 13. 13 is the amount of the change. And I now have a proportion. 100 over x is equal to 65 over 13. And now I'm just gonna do everything I've been doing. 65 times x, 65x. 100 times 13, that's just gonna be 1300. I now need to divide both sides by 65, and that's gonna give me x equals 20%, and this is a decrease, a 20% decrease. This is all we're doing. If you can figure out this number and that number, you're in good shape. Okay, we are actually only going to do one more, and we are done with percent of change. So, Leon's social studies average in the first quarter was 96. In the second quarter, his average was 80. What was the percent decrease in his social studies grade? Let's pull up our bar here. And then again, we're just going to copy it. We're going to put one next to it. 100% is going to be right there. X is going to be here. What is the original amount? Well, it says that in the first quarter he was at a 96, second quarter he was at an 80. The first comes before the second, so up here the original amount is going to be that 96. And then I need to figure out the amount of the change. So here I'm going to do 96 minus the 80. It's going to give me 16 is the amount of the change. So now I can figure out the percent of the change. Here's my proportion. 100 over x equals 96 over 16. We're going to use our cross products. That's going to give me 96x equals 100 times 16. That is 1600. I'm then going to divide both sides by 96. And when you do that math, you're going to get x equals 16 0.6. So we're going to say that this is approximately a 17% decrease. He went from 96 to 80, so his grade decreased approximately 17%. We just round that 16.6 up to approximately 17%. Okay, so that is all we are doing on percent of change. I appreciate your attention. We got this. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.